Ubaydah is the second temple built for god Amun in Siwa Oasis and is situated in a close distance from Agur Mizraq. It's distinguished by the vast area of white ground where stones are scattered in a wide range. A single wall stands among the ruins, and it still preserves its reliefs. In fact, blue color could still be seen in many of its scenes. This temple was built by King Nectanebo II during the last dynasty that ruled Egypt, the 30th dynasty. It's the temple of Amun, which was mentioned in the story of the visit of Alexander the Great to the Oasis. Until the beginning of the 19th century, a big part of the temple was kept in a good condition. But in the year 1811, an earthquake destroyed a part of it. Between the year 1819 and 1821, the travelers who visited the area, like Caio, Androvetti, and von Minotoli, noticed that some stones fell from the roof and that one of the walls of the temple was about to fall. The wall that remains from the temple is the side of a chamber, which walls were covered with reliefs. It kept standing like the rest of the parts of the temple until 1897, when the sheriff called Mahmoud Azmi put gunpowder in the bases of the room and blew it out to obtain stones needed to build the steps of the police station in Hassuna Palace and to build his own house. This governmental employee destroyed with his ignorance in minutes what the cruel hands of time couldn't destroy in thousands of years. According to the drawings published by von Minotoli and Caio and their descriptions, in addition to what Rolfs has published in 1874, we can say that the original temple's direction was facing north, and that the temple itself was surrounded by two walls, and their remains could be seen today. The wall that used to surround Ubaydah temple in Siwa Oasis was square in its design, and throughout the many visits of the temple, many parts of it fell down, but the sanctuary of god Amun and the chamber preceding it or the vestibule were still there. In front of them was the hypostyle hall. In front of the temple and within the enclosure wall, there used to be a high building built of alabaster blocks. One of these blocks could have been an altar or a base for one of the statues of Amun. Its sides were relieved with big human heads, and one of them was topped with the two horns of a ram, which is a head of god Amun, for whom the temple was consecrated. It was the drawings of von Minotoli that gave us an idea about the sequence of the scenes on the sanctuary's walls, and the deities pictured on them, before the place got demolished by the hands of the Sheriff Mahmoud Azmi and his gunpowder in 1897. That wall is so similar to the opposing wall in the same chamber, and still exists in its original place. The blocks of stones that still lie around the last standing wall are remainings from the ceiling. We owe the credit of finding out the builder of the temple to the drawings of von Minotoli, for on one of the blocks there are two cartouches which have beyond doubt the name of Nectanebo II, who is one of the 30th dynasty's pharaohs and who is considered one of the most active builders during the last era of the Egyptian history, for he had built and restored a lot of monuments in the Nile Valley and extended his activities to the oasis. A good example of his work is that he restored and added to El Kharga temple in addition to constructing this temple in Siwa. For many years, Ubaida temple was the most favorable place for illegal treasure hunters who had found a small number of small bronze statues and few other monumental objects. Moreover, the locals had used it as a quarry for stones. They broke and cut its stones and used it to build houses in Aghurmi, which houses were all built by stones without using karshif, the local material. They've also built irrigation canals in the gardens. Excavations were done in the eastern side, and a dekka or a seat was found made of 5 layers of limestone. And in the eastern end, a water well was explored too. The purpose of that dekka was never known, but it could be a reinforcement for the hill over which the temple was built. As for the northern side, excavations revealed a lot of big stones that reached 20 in number, comprising reliefs like stars and winged eagle, and they were used for the ceiling or upper threshold of entrances. In the far north, there are 2 giant bases where the main entrance of the area lies. As for the rest of the monumental area, which is as many folds as the area of the temple, it is still unexplored. During excavations, many skeletons were found buried in the ground and the size of the temple and its attachments. They belong to the late periods, most probably the Roman or the Islamic period. Both temples, the Oracle and Ubaida, were rebuilt or restored during the 26th and 30th dynasties, for there are some blocks of stones reused in the buildings. For example, a colored figure of god Ammon was found in the eastern wall of the sanctuary. It was placed in the middle of the wall, which indicates that there was a temple that was destroyed and rebuilt again. Describing the only standing wall in the temple of Ubaida in Siwa Oasis, we need to start at its upper part, where there is a long text composed of 51 lines. As for the rest of the wall, 3 rows of gods were relieved. In 1820, that wall was in much better shape than it is now, and that can be noticed when comparing its current state with the drawings of Fon Minotoli of the other similar demolished wall of the sanctuary. There used to be a frieze of decorations on top of the wall. The royal cartouche was repeatedly protected by goddess Nekhbit, depicted as a vulture. Below that scene, several men were shown performing the ritual of opening the mouth in high relief. In the upper row, we can see the builder of the temple, who was the ruler of the oasis in the same time, when Ammon. He kneels in front of Ammon, who sits inside his shrine, and behind him stand 7 gods. In the middle row, 9 gods were pictured, but only 8 remained. As for the lower row, only 3 gods remained. In 1820, the wall had kept additional number of gods, and the name of each god was carved in front of his figure, accompanied by a text for each of the gods. Behind god Amun-Ra stands goddess Mut. The other god is either Amun-Ra or Mut. As for the gods depicted on the middle row, they are from right to left: Atum, Shu, Tefnut, Set, Geb, and Nut. The name of the last god has disappeared. The gods depicted in the bottom row head to the left. The first of them is a male one, and his name is lost, but most probably he was god Horus. The second one is a goddess with a lost name too. As for the third, she's goddess Nekhbit. According to the texts recorded on the standing wall of Ubaidah temple in Siwa Oasis, the builder of this temple, who was pictured kneeling in front of the sanctuary of god Amun-Ra, was called Wen Amun, and his main title was the Great Chief of the Desert. His father's name was Nekhbit, and he carried the same title. Most probably, he preceded his son in ruling this oasis. As for Wen Amun's mother, she was called Neferrembet. Wen Amun wears the ostrich reed over his head, which shows he's a descendant of a Libyan origin, and most probably he descended from the same Libyan family that kept ruling the oasis for several centuries. As for the temple itself, it was built during the reign of King Nectanebo II, who has monuments in other parts of Egypt like Edfu Temple. It's very rare to find the text of the ritual of opening the mouth inscribed on the walls of temples. Most commonly, it was found on papyrus or on coffins, and in other times on the walls of tombs, for these texts are connected with burial rituals. In general, this text appears on the walls of the temple or the chapel used in funerary purposes. An example of that is the chapel of Anirdis in the temple of Habu. Accordingly, Dr. Ahmed Fakhri, the prominent Egyptologist, believed that when Amun was buried in a place not far away from Ubaidah temple. The ritual of opening the mouth was the last ritual performed on the mummy by the hands of a priest right before placing the mummy in its eternal house or the tomb. This ritual enables the deceased to retain his ability to talk again after death and to receive all essential elements of life after death, especially food and drinks. The best example of such ritual is found on the walls of the famous king Tutankhamun in his tomb in the Valley of the Kings in West Thebes. The temple of Ubaidah in Siwa Oasis was damaged to a great extent on the hands of the Sheriff of Siwa in 1897. He blew it out to use its stones to build steps to the police station in Hassuna Palace and to build his own house. thanks to the drawings of von Minutoli, we can have a good idea about the reliefs of the destroyed walls. In his atlas, we see the scenes arranged exactly as in the remaining single wall of the sanctuary. The texts of opening the mouth ritual are relieved in the upper frieze. On its left side, we find when Amon, the temple's builder, kneeling down in front of Amon-Ra in his sanctuary. There are 3 rows of gods different from those on the matching wall and exceed them in number. In one of the scenes, we find when Amon putting a reed above his head and standing in front of a god in his shrine. It's noticeable that this god wears an ostrich reed too in his hair, which proves that he is of a Libyan origin, or at least his looks show that. This leads us to believe that this is the ancient god who was worshipped in Siwa before the cult of Amon spread in the Oasis. The name of this god is lost, and no other similar scene of that god is found in any other place in Siwa. In the drawings of von Minutoli, we find some stone blocks relieved with gods' pictures, as well as some other parts of the temple that were still standing in his time. It seems that the painter who helped Minutoli was only interested in the shapes of gods, for he had filled the space which had hieroglyphic writings with small signs or lines of his own, which had no significance whatsoever. All in all, we owe him, for that's the only document of its kind that we have. We should also remember that the hieroglyphic writings and symbols were not yet solved at that time, and that the artist was only producing a pure artistic work. At least, it tells us how perfectly built and inscribed Umm temple was, to glorify the cult of Amon, the mighty god in Siwa Oasis, thousands of years ago. And that testifies to the greatness of the ancient Egyptians.